My name is Martin Ochien'g. I'm the Group Managing Director and CEO for Sasini PLC, which is East Africa's biggest agricultural business.
So, perhaps a good place to start is to give us a bit of a background in terms of your upbringing. And
Upbringing. Okay, that's an interesting question. I'm Kenyan by birth, and born into some middle-class family in the late 60s. One of 4 children, 3 sisters. I'm the eldest, obviously. So that came with some, I would say, leadership roles right from when I was young, or expectations, let me call them, which then developed into, as one grows up, taking up other leadership roles in other aspects of life. So I went to school here, and in Kenya, went to university here, qualified in the early 90s, and started working here for the pharmaceutical industry for an American business called 3M Healthcare, which is part of the 3M conglomerate, one of the most diversified businesses in the world to date. Worked for them for a couple of years, from 94 to about 95, and then joined another American company called Warner Lambert. Warner Lambert was at the time the world's second biggest pharmaceutical company. And I joined them as a territory manager in charge of Western Kenya, Eastern Uganda, Northwestern Tanzania, the region around Lake Victoria. Basically, as a leading a team of medical representatives, detailing prescription medicines to doctors, pharmacists, hospitals, nurses, for ailments that we had treatments for. A very interesting piece of work, if you ask me. I remember that very fondly. Warner Lambert then got bought by Pfizer in the second half of 1999. And through that purchase, joined Pfizer and became managing director for Pfizer Consumer Healthcare business in East Africa, which was one of the 2 big units driving the Pfizer business at the time. So there's a business called Pfizer Pharmaceutical Group, which drove the prescription business, and Pfizer Consumer Healthcare, which drove the over-the-counter business. And so through that, worked with Pfizer. They sent me to Oxford in early 2000 for my MBA. When I was done with that, they then sent me to Cape Town to go and head regional marketing for Sub-Saharan Africa, and then later on for Africa and Middle East, based out of Cape Town. The Cape Town office looked after the Africa Middle East region, and so that was the head office in Tokai. So I worked there until 2007, at which point I moved to KWV International. KWV is one of South Africa's premier alcoholic beverages company. I think it's the second biggest now, after Distel. And I joined them as head of global marketing, in charge of marketing strategy and operations in the whole world, in 64 markets where we were working, spanning from Japan in the east to Canada and the US in the west, everything in between, and focusing especially on Africa. So I was there for several years, 4 or 5 years. Then I moved to Tyco International, which is another American business in the subscriber industry in security. So it was the world's biggest fire and security business, as head of marketing and strategy for the same region, Africa, Middle East. And then later on for the same company as managing director of Tyco Commercial business. Something I did until I relocated back here to then join Sasini as the current MD.
yeah, that's interesting, your journey. And I know you started off in biological science. And how have you been able to transition throughout your journey, your career journey, through different roles,
I think it's the choice of having been in sales.
Yes.
And I say choice carefully, because I don't think I chose it. Yeah, it's my ambition out of college was to go into research and become a research scientist, end up teaching in the university or doing something along the academic line of things. And I did get that opportunity when I got out of the university. While I was working in my first research job as a research fellow, I got a call from 3M Healthcare. They were looking for a medical representative. And at the time, I didn't really know what a medical representative was.
Yeah.
A medical rep, as we call it in the industry, is basically a salesperson. Whose job is to sell technical aspects of pharmaceutical prescription drugs to doctors, pharmacists, hospital groups, and to nurses that are aimed at treating specific therapeutic problems that people do have. And so it requires training in either biological sciences, in medicine itself, or in pharmacy, or dentistry, or veterinary medicine. So you understand the biological aspect of how pharmaceutical products work.
Yes.
But it is a sales job.
Sure.
And I never saw myself in sales. I just thought, like, okay, this is like scum of the earth kind of career. But when I started doing it, I liked it. And so I moved away from my science background of wanting to be a research scientist into delving into business. And sales teaches you a lot. I think all of us, if you think about it, we are selling something.
Yes, that's true.
And one of the biggest things that I learned in that job is to overcome the fear of rejection, because you're always going to seek for somebody's help in doing your job. And half the time you get rejected. And so you have to lift yourself up, move on to the next call, and try and do that. And so when I started doing that, you develop business skills that are not aligned to a specific industry. And those you can carry from one industry to the next. And that's aided my movement from pharma into alcoholic beverages, into the service industry, and now into agriculture.
You talked about your fondness for being different, you know, and in the clothes you wear, you know, and how do you carry that out in your day-to-day business activities?
I try to be as natural as I can.
Yes.
Because these jobs come with a lot of pressure. And if you just dial into that pressure, you lose yourself in the process. And so what I do is, if you think about dress code, for example, is to try to be as comfortable as one can be. So I have a specific day in the week that I just go easy. Usually it's Fridays. And you'll see me in, you know, different varieties of African attire. Why? Because I'm African, and also because I really do enjoy the diversity of what the African fabric gives you in dress code. But earlier on in the week, I'm very formal because my job is formal, my interactions are formal. And even in that formality, there's a grade in terms of color, texture, and what one wears that I don't go beyond.
Sure.
Just, some people call it conservative, but I prefer that because it's what makes me comfortable.
Sure, yeah.
And I think comfort is a big thing in driving what you do every day.
Sure. You have to introduce me to your tailor before I leave.
I will. I think you look nice in it. And that's something that in South Africa we don't do well because we do have quite some good variety of African texture and difference in terms of the ethnic groups and what they wear as traditional wear.
Yes.
Really, really colorful, nice stuff. And I think we could engulf that more.
Sure.
We express ourselves as Africans.
No, I agree. So, as you know, most MBA programs stress the importance of, you know, self-awareness and reflecting as a leader. Do you practice this sort of way of doing leadership roles?
Yeah, my understanding of self-awareness, and I hope it's the same you've got, is that you don't lose yourself in the job you do. You've got to be, the best quote I have for that is, you've got to lead yourself first before you lead others.
Yes.
Leadership is a broad concept, depending on who you talk to. I split mine into 4 areas. The first area is self-leadership. And what that calls for is that exact topic of self-awareness. How do I lead myself? What language do I use to talk to myself?
Okay.
When I look at myself in the mirror, what do I see? Is it commensurate with what I want to see?
Sure.
And if there's a gap, how do I bridge that gap? Because only when I perfect that can I then go into the second aspect, which is leading others.
Yes.
I can't lead others if I don't lead myself well. And in leading others, then you try to impose what you've got as good aspects of your self-leadership into leading others. And then that goes into the third aspect, which is thought leadership. And that calls for you to distinguish yourself above everybody else, not as the person who always has the ideas, but as the person who inspires those ideas out of yourself and out of other people. And if you do that well, then you get the fourth aspect, which is results leadership. which is actually the outcome of those three things. So self-awareness is key. You got to be, be true to your values, stay grounded. Humility is big in that aspect. And leadership also comes with different styles. There are times when you need to lead from the front. There are times when you need to lead from being amongst the people that you're leading. Other times you need to let other people lead you. And so you lead from the back and you step back. Yeah, and if you can't do all those things if you're not self-aware.
Got you. And through my reading, I've noticed that you're a champion for gender balance. And does this come from your upbringing with your siblings and your mom?
It comes from my dad, whom I lost over 30 years ago. So it's amazing that influence is still there. Yeah. But when we were growing up, my sisters and I were treated as equals, and he emphasized that story very strongly. And he did simple things like opening the car door for them to get into the cars and encourage me to do the same, pulling the chairs for them to sit. And I always wondered, how come I don't get that treatment? Yes. And it drummed into me at that time in the 80s. It wasn't really commonplace for men to treat women that way. Yes, and so it was very different. Good example. And so I grew up with him telling me, you're not any different from these ladies. And then when I got home, my mom had the same exact message. So when she did the work rosters for us to help her with work in the house the whole week, I had an equal task as the ladies had. Okay. And so I never saw myself different. Yes. And so days for cleaning, I cleaned the house. The days for cooking, I cooked. And in fact, my current cooking alignment comes from that time. Sure. Yeah. And so when I got into the working space, I was already in this area where it is entrenched in me that you're not different from the female folk in your life. So that's the one area it comes from. The other area is I lost my dad quite early. And so my mom became a central figure in the sort of like mid part of my upbringing. And she infused that same message that, you're not any different just because you're a boy or you're a male figure. And so in the social space, that teaching is there. Yes. In the workspace, when I started working in the early 90s, the issues of equality at the time were just starting to surface. Sure. They were not being exemplified. They're still not being exemplified today. And so you've got to be very deliberate about driving that agenda if you're a leader. Gotcha. And for me, I've gone beyond equality. I'm now thinking about equity, is advancing not just female rights and female aspects of being on the same table with the same tasks, but equipping them more than you equip our male counterparts, because they need that. And that's what drives equity, to be as successful as the male counterparts are. So yeah, that's where it comes from.
No, very inspiring, very inspiring. And then, so I've read that we also, Sasini Group is on the back of one of their most successful year in 70 years. I think having set this target 3 years ago of the 1 billion Kenyan shilling mark, how have you guys managed to achieve that in such tough times? And you started in 2019, right?
Yeah, it's several things. The first I would say is a very clear, simple strategy, because that's where it starts. Certainly, in my view, if you don't have a strategic direction that is strong enough that you can then operationalize to achieve those goals, you really don't have a direction of where you want to go. So when I joined, that was the first thing we did, was to set that strategy very clear and to say, these 6 things, if we do them well, will take us to a profit after tax in excess of 1 billion shillings. Sure. That year, we lost 400 million after tax. And so, we said to do that in 5 years, to reach 1 billion. To have done it in 3.5, or just under 3 years, under 4 years rather, is really remarkable. Yeah. But it talks to the focus we've had in that strategic direction. So the first thing is to set the strategy. Then popularize that strategy by taking it down the organization. So everybody buys into it, and everybody understands what they're pulling through. So every task we all do is driven towards that one goal. And then execute, and execute excellently. And so my role there, quite honestly, has been one of just inspiring and driving, the achievement of that. But if you ask me what has really driven that, 3 things. One is the ability to be decisive and solve or devolve that decision-making process into the organization.
Okay,
So you get quicker decisions, you get quicker action,
yes.
so you don't have bureaucracy. Number two is empowering people through delegation. In saying, yes, you have the authority to lead this business, you make the decisions, but delegate competently. So delegate to people who can actually help you to advance that goal. And then number three is engagement. Just being present, talking to everybody, making sure people understand repeatedly what we are looking for and buy into that goal. You'll get the results.
You get the results.
I think that's what's driven us to this point. Now that we've gotten to that level, our challenge is what's the next?
Yes.
What's the next level? What strategy then takes us to that level? We are working on that at the moment.
Sure. Yeah, I heard that you can release it quite soon.
Yes, we are.
The strategies.
Yeah.
And then I've been quite interested in this Sasini branded local products. But I also heard you speak about the low consumption in the Kenyan markets.
Yeah.
With this brand of products, do you look to expand or diversify with?
So by all intents and purposes, we are an export business.
Yes.
For the 71 years we've been in existence, our job has been to grow, process, pack, market, and export tea, coffee, macadamia, and avocado. But we become so good at doing that, and we did it for so long, until some years back we asked ourselves, okay, if we're taking these top quality products to the global markets, what are we doing about the local market? Should we be offering this same quality locally? Because what you find in our competitive landscape is that's not what happens.
Okay.
People take the best quality abroad because it fetches good prices and don't necessarily avail that same quality locally. So we chose to go the different way and launch these products, tea and coffee, that is the same level that we export in terms of quality to our local markets here. It's still very small, still very fledgling, but it's growing, and we're very happy with where we are. And to answer you directly, yes, we intend to grow that, because being a Kenyan business that is global, I think part of that success needs to be reflected locally.
Yes.
So we see ourselves as this local company that feeds the world, because we're in that food chain. And if you're feeding the world, you must feed yourself at home first as well. And so our participation in the local market is really key.
Sure, 100%. And in that, I also read about the Outgrowers, right?
Yeah.
How big are they in the production of the tea?
Well, across all our products, not just tea. So we have a model that is also, again, very deliberate. And you'll hear this word deliberate in my talk a lot, because it's what drives me. Is if I want to do something, this is what I want to do.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't focus on why I can't do it. I look for how I can do it. Yes. And I'm not responsible for that particular aspect that I'm about to talk about. I found it in Sasini and I really liked it. But the model is simple. We are one of the biggest landowners in the country because of the agricultural plantations we control. And we are fully Kenyan owned. And because of that, we are very influential in the agricultural sector. We can easily run our business based on our plantations. We really don't need outgrowers. Yes. But a few decades back, we sort of like sat back and thought, why would you want to do that? Yes. If you've got this model that is successful in processing these products for export, why wouldn't you want the farmers around you to benefit the same way? Yeah. So what we did was, instead of building the production and manufacturing capacity for just our estates, yes, we built twice what our estates needed, so that we could use the other half to then be satisfied by the outgrower programs that we have in our communities. So in our tea business, we get about 55% of our tea from outgrowers and 45% from our own estates. Those tea outgrowers number 26,000 in number. There's a huge amount of farmers we deal with. On the coffee side, 50-50 from ourselves and from outgrowers. We work with about 8,000 to 10,000 outgrower farmers in coffee. In our avocado and macadamia business, because our orchards are still new, they only come into production in another year's time, 100% of our produce is from outgrowers for now. And when we do get to our production, it's going to be 50-50 as well. So it's deliberate. And why? Because you want that benefit that you've really brought into the local agricultural setup to be felt in the whole community.
Yes. Yes. No, it's supporting local markets. And then I know that Sasini has the ambitious goal, and they've been committed to achieving this goal of being the #1 agribusiness in the continent.
Africa,
What strategies do you guys have to?
Yeah, I may not be able to give you the full detail, but I'll tell you in broad strokes what those are. It's a very ambitious goal.
Yeah.
When we set that goal, I found the goal in the business. So quite frankly, I just think we were not moving as fast as we needed towards that goal.
Yes.
And so at that time, we were not even the biggest agricultural business in Kenya 4 years ago. So we've catapulted ourselves into this #1 position in the region, East Africa. Yeah. And for you to go continentally with that same position, you've got to grow organically and inorganically.
Okay.
And so if I could share the summary of the strategy that we are working on now is to achieve that. Okay. So that will come with some serious growth in our current business and growth with things that we're not doing today.
Yes.
And that may involve, looking at partnerships, acquisitions maybe, or organic growth in areas, going to markets we are not in today, diversification, driving all those things on the bedrock of being sustainable and doing our business on that sustainable platform. We believe we will achieve that in the next 5 to 7 years, and so we're very committed to it.
Sure. Yeah. On the topic of sustainability, I know you've been recently appointed as the chairman of the board of the Global Compact Network in Kenya.
Yeah.
And on these type of platforms, how do you see one enacting change through that?
Through being deliberate again. The UN Global Compact is the world's biggest corporate initiative towards driving the Sustainable Development Goals. It was designed and launched for corporates like ourselves to help us to improve the things that had gone wrong, so that we can leave the world better than we found it. The principles are based on 4 key areas. The aspect of human rights and respecting that and advancing good human practice. 2 is the aspect of good labor law and good labor practice as well. 3 is the protection of the environment. And then number 4, which is very close to my heart, is anti-corruption, is removing the aspect of bad business from your environment.
Yes.
And there are 10 principles under those 4 key areas that drive those 4 goals, and underpinned by the 17 Sustainable Development Goals.
Yes.
And so what those goals are is, if we achieve these goals, the target is to do them by 2030, we'll reverse some of the negative things we are seeing in the world today around those 4 key areas.
Sure.
So things like child labor, elimination of child labor, elimination of cheap labor generally, exploiting people, making sure that workers can organize themselves into collective bargaining agreements, that they can speak as a group, and that we are, as corporates, working to pay better, making sure we improve the environment.
Yes.
We are the generation that has participated in messing up the environment more than anybody else. And if we don't start the journey of reversing that, we won't have achieved much. So we are very committed to that. And then doing all these things without having to change things under the table in an anti-corruption mantra, in a corruption-free environment. And so our commitment to that is very strong. But where you make differences is where leaders dial into these principles and drive them not just for themselves and their organizations, but for the general good of society. And Kenya is doing very well. Our local network is the biggest in the continent in terms of membership. It's also one of the biggest in terms of impact, because that's what you want. Is yes, you're driving these sustainable development goals, but towards what? And so if you can't show impact, if you sink a borehole in a village, for example, where everybody was walking 10 kilometers to go fetch water, and now the water comes to them, and that impacts a whole village of 10,000 people, you've impacted that. And if you replicate that 10 times, you have a whole community that now lives a better life. And that's what we look to do. So, yeah, it's strong leadership. I have very strong members of the board, some of the biggest corporate names and leaders you have in the country, and together we are very committed to achieving these goals. So there's an acceleration that needs to happen, because 2030 is around the corner, and to be honest, we haven't really gotten to the place where we need to be now.
Okay.
So we need to get going and show that impact.
But I think the Sasini group is also showing a good point of starting by releasing a sustainability report as part of their
and the report is not really the end goal. The report is just to show, because you can't also have a report if you're not doing anything.
True.
And so first of all, start doing something, show that impact, and then share it. Part of the reason we do those reports is to share the news with the stakeholders, but also to give commitments to future goals that we want to achieve and to be held accountable. Because if I say this year that next year I want to move my gender aspect from 40% in the organization to 50%, we're going to measure that. So have you made the movement in 1 year? And if not, why not? And if you have, how have you? And how can others benefit from that? So the report is just really, it's the end game of what you actually do. What is important is what you do and the impact you create. But we are proud to have released that report. It's the first to be released under the new global reporting initiatives, which includes GRI 13, which is specific for the agriculture sector. And so it was very stringent for us to write it in the specific way we did. It allowed us to showcase the work that we are doing very proudly, but above all, it helps us to set the baselines for the future and targets that we want to achieve going forward.
Amazing. And then I've always been interested, very much like South Africa, the weakening of the local currency, right? How does a business on the scale of Sasini manage this,
We are on the luckier side of that story. Why? Because we're an export business, and exporting means that you're trading in forex and your proceeds come in foreign currencies. And so, but our expenses are in local currencies. So you've got to convert your foreign currency receipts into local currency cash to use for local expenditure. So if your local currency weakens, you're getting more for your foreign currency. So in that aspect, we gain as an export business, and most exporters gain that way. But we can't sit there and say we are happy with that and ignore the other side of the coin, which are people who import stuff that they need to then do their work. Manufacturers, for example. Because what it means is you're needing more Kenya shilling to buy the same dollar. And so you're squeezing from something else that you could be doing. And that's not a good thing. I think the government is doing its best to try and manage that. It's got to work through the central bank with the private sector and with the economy at large, just like we do in South Africa, and try and maintain a level that is not harmful to either side of import and export. That balance is really, really critical. And Kenya is at a space where we are really strong around driving local manufacturing for local consumption, but more importantly, to drive our export-led growth in the economy. So we need more exporters of Kenyan produce. And to be able to do that, we need a very stable Kenyan shilling, and that balance with local currency and the international currency is very important.
Very important. I'm with you. And then I'd like to get your take on agricultural mechanization. Obviously, it has its social issues behind it, but is Kenya at a point now where they're starting to adopt technologies in this space?
We've been there over 20-25 years.
25 years,
Some industries far ahead of others. The tea industry, for example, has been mechanized since the early 2000s in different forms of mechanization. First of all, in the field, in harvesting, but lately in the factories, in production as well. The key driver of that is several-fold. There's so many benefits to it. One is increased efficiency. If I talk about tea plucking, you and I plucking tea for 8 hours a day will each pluck between 45 and 50 kilos of green leaf. Okay. If I give you a harvesting machine and you give me a harvesting machine, each of us will bring 6,000 kilos in that 8-hour period at a fraction of the cost. And so we have to move with technology, and we have to move with the aspect of doing things better, cheaper, for us to advance. So that's the one benefit. The second benefit is for us to really scale our agriculture and stay relevant, not just in tea, but in other cash crops that we do. We've got to move into mechanization. We've got to go into mechanized agriculture. In fact, the current government is very strong on that. in saying that we want to not just rely on agriculture as a backbone of our economy, but as a backbone of what drives our exports and our relevance in the global markets. Yes. To do that, we've got to go into commercial farming in a mechanized manner. The other flip side of that coin is, okay, then what do you do with the job that you have to replace that were manually doing these jobs that you're now mechanizing? Yes. And so you've got to be creative with creating new opportunities for those workers and those laborers or those colleagues that we've got in the system that then you can upskill and move into other aspects. In our case, when we did it 3.5, 4 years ago, we absorbed a lot of those workers in other areas of our business, the factories, and we moved a lot of them into the outgrower schemes to then grow tea and then suppliers. And so the aspect of economic income was actually enhanced as opposed to being lost. And so we mechanized smoothly, albeit at a time when the world was going through its challenges with COVID. But we feel that is the way to go. Sure. Technology exists to make things better. Yeah, and we have to engulf it. And so one of the key lessons I tell people when I talk about this is we also have to train our kids for jobs that are relevant today, not jobs that were useful in the 1900s. Yeah, and so if jobs become obsolete, we have to adjust our education system and our training programs for relevance today. Yeah, and so mechanization does that and technology does that very well.
And then Martin, on a lighter note, right? I heard you a chef at home.
I wouldn't call myself a chef. I don't know why this question keeps coming up. I cook.
Yes.
Let me say that. I cook at home. I enjoy doing it. There's several reasons for that. One is sort of like carrying over the legacy of my dad. He was an excellent cook. He rarely cooked, but when he did, there was this aura in the house that we just ate anything he put on the table because it was so good. But also my mom brought us up in a way that I wasn't seen as a boy amongst girls. I was just one of the children. And so when she taught us to do these things, she taught us, all of us at the same level, with the same skill, expecting the same results. And so I learned how to do those things. I do other chores as well, but cooking was something I then got interested in. So when I started my family, I felt nice cooking for people, for my kids, and for visitors and that kind of stuff. And that just stuck. That's the one reason. The second reason is I don't know anything better in terms of relaxing me when I get home after a long day's work than getting into the kitchen and figuring out what to cook for dinner. So it's a bit of a personal thing as well. And so I find a lot of joy in just opening the fridge and saying, hey, what do we have today? Sometimes I plan what I'm going to cook beforehand, over the weekend, for example. Other times during the week, I just get in and I work with what I find there. And the family enjoy it because it's like, okay, that's home. What are we eating? And it's an extra level of responsibility. It puts some weight on your shoulders. It's a different type of weight from what you have the whole day in a corporate setting. And so that relaxation for me is really, really key. And then lastly is to see the results of that and how people are enjoying it at the dinner table, asking for more, and saying, tomorrow, can you try this, and when are we eating that? And that to me is really interesting.
Yes. I've always envied people that enjoy cooking, he's passionate about it.
But it's also breaking stereotypes.
It's breaking stereotypes,
In the African setup, men are not supposed to be in the kitchen. It's such nonsense, if you ask me.
Yes.
Because in actual sense, and I say this with a lot of respect, men who take up this skill tend to be very, very good. Some of the world's best chefs are men. I don't see why you'd shy away from taking care of your family, because that's what it is really for me. Is I'm providing for them, and that provision is not just financial in terms of what I do, but it's in these small things that I do to support people at home. I really enjoy it.
Sure. What's a classic dish?
I don't have a specific one.
Something that family enjoys?
Those guys eat a lot of meat. So yeah, throwing meat on the barbecue, which is one of the simplest things to do. But we have a mantra of trying things out. Sure. So I don't work with recipes. I get in there and decide what to do based on what's available and what groceries you've got in the fridge. So I oscillate from classic starch-based things with rice, for example, to protein-heavy foods with seafood and stuff like that, and everything in between. Oriental African continental. And so it's just, and I have never been to a chef school. I have no intention of doing that. It's just stuff that you teach yourself. You watch a lot of these food programs on TV, pick up a few things here and there, you experiment. And so, yeah, that's really what drives me.
Okay. I've also seen a photo of floating around of you in an Arsenal shirt. But I won't go there.
I don't know you want to talk about that. Yeah, I'm an avid Arsenal supporter. I've been since the late 80s.
Sure.
I used to be a Liverpool supporter. I guess when I was younger, they were doing very well in the league. And then Arsenal won the league. I think it was around between 1989 and 1991.
Yes.
And I just liked that team.
Invincibles era, right?
No. Invincibles was later.
Okay.
And then I sort of just liked them and the style of football they played. I've invested a lot of my money supporting them, sometimes painfully, but I enjoy it because it's a passion. I've been to watch them several times. I wish them all the best. I think they currently have a very good team. So if they can add on to that, they'll do well. And I hope they do.
Yeah. Next season, let's see. Just to close off, Martin, as mentioned at the start, just kind of give us a sense of what a business decision that you're currently grappling with. And then maybe leave us with, like an open-ended question for people to go home and think about.
There are so many challenges in business that it's difficult to pick out one specific one. But let me talk about the current season. Agriculture is seasonal. So a season is a harvest season, for example. The current market, because of inflationary issues in the US, which is one of our main nuts markets, our macadamia business is very reliant on North America. The current North American demand for macadamia nuts is almost on the floor. It's just not existent, and has been since December last year because of what's going on in the US, increase in interest rates, pressure on consumers to use disposable income cleverly, and so snacking has collapsed almost. And so what you're seeing now is where we used to have this steady flow of macadamia nuts into the US that has slowed down. If you take that back into the value chain, what does that mean? So it goes back to the farmer, ourselves, and where we source our nuts from, not knowing what to do with their nuts. You can't process them and keep them. You can't also leave them in the estates because they just fall off and rot. So that's something that we're struggling with at the moment. So how do you manage that? Looking for new markets, looking for new ways of marketing macadamia away from just raw kernels into other processed forms of macadamia. So it does open up your eyes towards innovation. And problems are a good thing. I keep insisting, there's nothing better than business problems because they force you to look at that business very differently. And in that difference, you do find a new way of doing things. And that's what we are grappling with at the moment. So we're having a very tough year with macadamia nuts. So that's one thing. We're having an equally tough year with our coffee business because the global coffee dynamics with regard to pricing have also gone reverse to what they were last year. We were fetching about $7 a kilo of raw beans last year. That's come down to $4 at the moment. $4 is almost at your cost of production, so you're not really making money, and in some cases you're losing money. How do you manage that? And that just shows how resilient a business can be in being good at difficult times, as opposed to only making money when the times are good. So that would be something we are struggling with. But in terms of asking people questions, I mean, if you listen to these problems, you might think doing business in this part of the world is difficult. I think the opportunities of the future lie in Africa, and not just in agriculture. In this country, in Kenya, we have one of the best fintech industries in the world. Based off what Safaricom does with M-Pesa. So the fintech industry is flourishing. The ICT industry here is flourishing. Why can't we be leaders? Having a Savannah Valley, for example, we keep talking about here, to rival the Silicon Valley and those tech-based businesses. We are seeing all the big players in that tech industry here because of the skill and the willingness for us to drive that. So Africa is open for business, and not just Kenya. If you think about South Africa, there are huge opportunities with the energy crisis we have there now. For somebody to come and say, hey, what can we do better to remove this issue sustainably going forward? You remember 5 years ago, we had water issues in Cape Town. We've solved them by thinking differently.
And better off now.
And better off now than we were then, not just relying on winter rain, because when it fails, what happens? So those opportunities do exist, and there's no better place than a place that has all these opportunities for growth and are not yet exploited. So my open-ended question would be, are you willing to come and invest here? Are you willing to come and do business in Africa in all these sectors, and not come with preconceived ideas from the East, the West, or Europe, or somewhere? Come and localize your thinking, of course with our experience, but looking for opportunities that will be Afrocentric and make Africa grow at the pace we think it should grow towards its contribution to the global economy.